Memory Power Tape Number 2. On the last tape, you were introduced to the basics of how your memory works. On this tape, we'd like to go into a little more detail. We're going to talk about how your memory goes about retaining information. To do this, we're going to discard the analogy of the filing cabinet and move to a closer simile. Your memory is like a computer. A computer stores and retrieves information. It can accept input from several sources: a magnetic disk where information has been previously stored, from a keyboard, mouse, pen, or touch on the screen, or from another computer, in the case of a network or modem. When the information is first sent to the computer, it is not permanently stored anywhere. It is held in a place called RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory, where it will stay until it is removed either by telling the computer to remove it or by turning off the computer. The information can be written onto a magnetic disk, much as music is recorded on a magnetic tape, where it will stay permanently. If the information is not stored permanently, it will be lost when the computer is turned off. This process is very similar to the way the human mind remembers. Our brains accept input from all 5 senses, as well as from the conscious mind. And like the computer, this input is stored temporarily. We are constantly receiving input, although we are unaware of 80 to 90% of the data stored. This is probably why we spend so much of our lives, nearly a third, asleep. Some research suggests that the body only requires about 2 hours of sleep. It is your mind, overwhelmed with input from the day, that requires 6 to 8 hours of sleep to sort through the input. To continue with our comparison, RAM is the computer's short-term memory. We also have short-term memories, and they are quite good. Most people can remember up to 7 numbers for at least a few seconds with little difficulty. Our short-term memories serve the same vital purpose that RAM serves in the computer. We receive information in the form of conscious thought and process that information. With our short-term memories, we are able to handle a few small bits of information at a time without having hundreds of other memories on the surface of our minds. Your short-term memory allows you to do simple arithmetic because you can keep 1 or 2 numbers in mind and discard the rest. Imagine if you were adding several numbers and they all stayed in your mind. Simple arithmetic would be a nightmare because each time you added a new number, you would have 1 more number to keep track of. With normal short-term memory, you only need to store the current sum and the next number in the series. You can discard all of the previous numbers. A computer's short-term memory works in the same way. A computer program performs a loop in which each number is added to the current sum. The computer doesn't care what numbers it has already encountered, nor does it care how many more numbers it will encounter before it is done. All it wants to know is, what number should I add to the current sum? When it has added the next number in the series, it stores the new sum and begins again, until there are no more numbers to be added. When information has been received in short-term memory, it is then either thrown on the heap of memories or transferred to long-term memory. Once a computer has information in RAM, it can then be saved permanently on some medium. Whatever the storage medium, the information is encoded, and there it will remain until it is purposely erased. Bringing the information back into RAM does not erase it from the disk. It is there to stay. Your memory works the same way. Once information is encoded from short-term to long-term memory, it is there to stay. If the coding of information was done correctly, it can be very easily retrieved. If the coding is bad, it may be lost forever to the conscious mind. So then, to remember things you want to remember, you must make sure you store them properly in your long-term memory. We can show you how to do this. As your mind receives information, it is first processed in short-term memory, where it may reside for about 30 seconds, if it isn't interrupted. A pattern of memory is laid down automatically, But without a conscious effort to transfer the memory from short-term to long-term memory, it may be impossible to recall later. Going back to our computer analogy, imagine what would happen if the computer recorded data onto a magnetic disk but failed to record directory information. The result would be information that was stored permanently but impossible to find. The result is the same as the human mind trying to recall a lost memory. The fault lies not in recall ability, but in faulty storage. Memory, to be useful to the conscious mind, must be transferred from long-term to short-term in such a way that it can be accessed later. To do so requires a method that will help you store the information. There are 3 basic techniques for safe transfer of memory: repetition, meaning, and chunking. Let's talk about repetition first. Over the years, you have probably stored lots of information in your long-term memory through repetition. The alphabet, the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, and the times tables are usually taught using repetition. Rote memorization depends on repetition. Repetition reinforces memory in a way scientists do not understand. The closest we can come to defining the phenomenon is to say that the memories are burned in. In other words, the electrochemical patterns in the cerebrum are reinforced. In this course, we will use repetition. However, while repetition is the best way to memorize long passages of text and therefore will always remain a key in memory training, we will not dwell on it. We will concentrate on alternative methods that you have probably already spent a lifetime learning how to memorize by repetition. The second way memories are transferred from short-term to long-term memory is by meaning. These types of memories need no repetition to remember because they carry a high emotional impact. Most people who were out of early childhood at the time still remember where they were when they heard that John F. Kennedy had died. Try and think back to your earliest childhood memory. We'll bet that the event you remembered had high emotional impact. Maybe you remember being jerked out of a swimming pool by a worried parent, or maybe you remember being told that you had a new baby brother. The greater the meaning or personal value placed on the experience, the easier it is to remember. Unfortunately, this emotional memory tool won't help you remember things like names and where you put your keys. There is another process that helps transfer short-term memories to long-term. This process is called chunking. When information is assembled in certain ways, it becomes easier to remember. As letters are assembled in various combinations, they take on more or less meaning. The more meaning, the easier they are to remember. For example, we'd like to read a string of 55 letters. See how many of them you can remember. W, P, D, I, O, A, S, O, W, A, N, V, O, G, R, D, P, S, W, D, S, C, D, W, Q, Z, O, S, P, Z, J, F, V, D, O, R, E, C, G, H, S, O, E, Q, X, D, C, T, O, R, C, S, I, D, L. How did you do? Probably not very well, and understandably so. These letters were grouped in a meaningless string. Of course, if you really did want to remember all of these letters, you could memorize the first 7 letters, then add 2 or 3 more, repeat again, and add a couple more until you had the entire string memorized. But that would take quite some time. Now we're going to give you another 55 letters to memorize. Let's see how you do this time. S-E-N-T-E-N-C-E-A R-E-M-E-M-B-E-R I-S-O-N-E E-A-S-I-E-R S-T-R-I-N-G T-O-T-H-A-N L-E-T-T-E-R-S R-A-N-D-O-M-O-F. You probably remembered a lot more letters this time. The difference is what is called chunking, putting information together into chunks, so that you need only remember 11 pieces of information rather than 55. Chunking is used in a lot of different ways. Chunking allows you to memorize telephone numbers with relative ease. Researchers have found that it is easier to store information when it is organized in chunks of 3, 4, 5, or 7. We use our natural internal rhythm to memorize. We break the 7-digit phone number into a chunk of 3 and a chunk of 4. This pattern of 7 is very common. It is remembered either as a chunk of 3 elements, followed by a chunk of 4, or 4, then 3. Telephone numbers are 3, then 4. Listen to the rhythm in this phone number: 425-6907. The alphabet is memorized in chunks of 4, then 3. The alphabet song begins with this pattern: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There are several more examples of rhythmic chunking, especially in groups of 3 and 7. Many companies and organizations choose acronyms with 3 letters for this very reason. Some examples are IBM, ABC, NBC, CBS, IRS, CIA, and FBI. This type of rhythmic chunking helps us store many types of information. Logical sequence aids chunking even further. By putting chunks of information together in such a way that they make sense as a whole, we can increase our ability to memorize even further. Here's another set of 55 letters. See how many you can remember this time. O-N-E, S-E-N-T-E-N-C-E, I-S, E-A-S-I-E-R, T-O-R-E-M-E-M-B-E-R, T-H-A-N-A, R-A-N-D-O-M, S-T-R-I-N-G, O-F-L-E-T-T-E-R-S. How many did you remember this time? You were probably able to remember the whole sentence, all 55 letters in seconds. By rearranging the same chunks of information into a logical set, they become easier to remember. And adding rhythm and rhyme to logical flow will increase your ability to remember even further. We will use these concepts of chunking, logical flow, rhythm, rhyme, repetition, and meaning to increase your current memorization ability. Visualization will also help you remember things. I will read 2 lists of words. See which list you can remember easier. Here is the first list: ship, bed, flower, car, banana. Now I will read the second list: vague, paucity, ordinary, pleasant, outer. Which list could you remember easier? The first list should have been much easier to memorize because this list was much easier to visualize. If you saw the objects in the first list in your mind's eye, these objects were much easier to remember. The second list was impossible to see in your mind. Some of the things we remember best are visual images like faces and objects, smells like cologne, skunk, and fresh-baked bread, sounds like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and popular commercial jingles, and tactile experiences like bee stings, kisses, and stubbed toes. Things we don't remember well are abstract ideas like numbers, words other than nouns, and symbols like random letters and names. We are able to easily remember visual images, but we have a hard time with abstract ideas. Because of this, the memory systems we will teach you make use of visual images. To help you remember what you need to remember, we will teach you to use mnemonics. This word comes from the name of an ancient Greek goddess, Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Almost anything that is used to improve the storage of memory is a mnemonic technique. Even if you've never heard of mnemonics before, you have probably used mnemonic devices. Do you remember the rhymes I before E except after C and 30 days hath September? If you do, then you know some mnemonic devices. Many educators today often look down on the use of mnemonic devices. They believe it is not scholarly to use what they call tricks to memorize things. It is ironic, however, that some of these same instructors use the alphabet song to teach their students the alphabet, or in spelling, teach their students the rhyme I before E except after C. These are mnemonic devices, but they are often not recognized as such. It is unfortunate that attitudes like this exist in the classroom. Students can benefit greatly from use of mnemonics. Some people think mnemonics are crutches, but tools is a better word for them. Mnemonics are powerful tools, and they allow you to increase your memory tremendously. Here are some more common examples of mnemonics. Acronyms are often used to compress a large amount of information into an easily remembered chunk. FBI is easier than the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and IRS is easier than the Internal Revenue Service. In science, you may have learned the colors of the light spectrum in order by learning the acronym Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And do you remember the names of the Great Lakes? If you can't remember them, we'll bet you will from now on. Think of the word Holmes. H stands for Lake Huron, O stands for Lake Ontario, M stands for Lake Michigan, E stands for Lake Erie, and S stands for Lake Superior. Acronyms, when they lend themselves well to the material to be memorized, are an excellent mnemonic tool. Of course, you must realize that the acronym alone will not give you the answer. You must already be familiar with the information and have it stored somewhere in your mind. Without familiarity, your mnemonic won't be sufficient to restore the original list. If you simply wrote down Roy G. Biv on your science test, you wouldn't get a very good score. However, acronyms serve as a good tool to help you recall the information you are already familiar with, but need help remembering. Another mnemonic technique widely used is converting the first letter of the words in a list into another list with the same first letters. For example, you can learn the steps in the scientific method by using the saying, "Old soldiers hide enemy tanks." Each first letter represents one step: observation, statement, hypotheses, experiment, and theory. This mnemonic relates to the idea of organizing chunks into logical flow. This is similar to the list of words we used earlier to group letters. The same words were used, but when they were rearranged into a logical sentence, they were much easier to remember. The seemingly unrelated words in the scientific method are difficult to commit to memory. The simple sentence, "Old soldiers hide enemy tanks," is easily remembered. Another application for first-letter mnemonics can be found in music. If you've ever had music lessons, you probably learned the notes in the treble and bass clefs this way. For example, can you remember the notes in the treble clef if you remember the saying, "Every good boy does fine," or "Every good bird does fly," and the acronym FACE? If you remember the sayings, "Great big dogs fight animals," and "All cars eat gas," you will know the notes in the bass clef. The main advantage of using these devices is that you know exactly how many items are included in the list. For example, if you had forgotten that there are 5 Great Lakes, the acronym HOMES will remind you. Before we teach you more specific mnemonic techniques for memorizing, we'd like to talk about a concept called word substitution. Substitution is actually a mnemonic device itself. It'll be used throughout the course. If you're going to use the other mnemonic systems successfully, you must first be familiar with word substitution and understand how to use it. Substitution does require the use of your imagination, so it may take a little practice for you to become proficient at it. Although substitution is usually used with other mnemonic systems, it is a powerful tool on its own. Even if you were never to learn another technique, substitution alone would double your ability to memorize. Substitution is based on the fact that things are easier to remember than ideas, because they are easier to visualize. By substituting an object for an abstract idea, we can easily visualize and therefore remember. To give you an example of word substitution, we will talk a little bit about names and how to remember them. Names are actually symbolic identification tags. They are an abstract idea, merely a series of sounds and symbols used to represent a person. This is the main reason why we remember faces but not names. It is easy to visualize a face. You can see it. But a name is difficult to see in your mind's eye. This is where word substitution comes in handy. Let's say you've just met Mike Waterman, and you want to remember his name. By substituting microphone for Mike and say a jug of water spilled on the head of a man, you should be able to remember Mike Waterman. Substituting the concrete objects microphone, water, and man makes the abstract name easier to visualize. Of course, the name we have given you is a simplified example, but this same technique applies to other words that are more difficult. For example, if you were trying to remember the name of a girl named Veronica, you could picture a harmonica. Although the words aren't exactly the same, the effort you take to mentally form the association will help you remember Veronica's name. We have only brushed the surface of word substitution. Later on, we will explore this concept in more detail. But for now, we just wanted to introduce you to the concept so you will understand how it works in the memory systems we are about to show you. We've come to the end of the second tape in the Memory Power course. On tape 3, you will learn about the most ancient memory system we know of today. Although they used this system in Greece centuries ago, it is still quite effective.